9:18 here, Big 550, KTRS. Joining us now is Russ Nocky. Russ Nocky is a Missouri boy. Where are you from originally?
I grew up in Higginsville, Missouri. It's Lafayette County, kind of central western part of the state.
All right. You have since gone on to become the Vice President of Communications for Republic Services. You're in town. Republic Services has been a big part of the conversation over the last couple of weeks and months because your company owns the Bridgeton Landfill, which has been in the news. You guys bought that in 2008.
That's correct. It was part of a larger national acquisition, but yes.
You told Channel 5 just the other day that Republic Services hasn't made $1 off of that site.
That's correct.
Is that possible?
That's still true. It is possible. Absolutely true.
Why did you buy it and why do you own it if you don't make $1 off of that site?
I'm asked that question every day. So in 2008, Republic Services acquired Allied Waste, and there were more than 1,000 different assets that were part of that acquisition, to include our two favorite landfills, Bridgeton Landfill and West Lake Landfill.
Is it not a transfer station, and that's how you make your money?
There is a transfer station located on the property. The way transfer stations work is they allow collection trucks that provide service at your home, really to get back out on the route more efficiently, more quickly, so they can continue to serve customers. So they deposit the load there at the site. These are our trucks. Mm-hmm. And then we load that trash into larger trucks and take it to a landfill. So it's an efficiency tool for us.
I've been told that transfer stations like that are where the money is. Do you make money off that place being a transfer station?
No, where the revenue would come on the hauling side would be the contracts we would have with municipalities or with commercial businesses. The transfer station is part of the service capabilities that we bring to be able to have service be more efficient.
Right.
We want those trucks to get back out on the streets as quickly as we can.
All right. So just so we understand, you don't make any money off the transfer of using that in any way, shape, or form.
Transfer stations, just like a truck, they're all part of the assets that we bring to provide service to a customer. But it's not as if there's somebody out there with a.
So you need a transfer station. That's where you have it because you own the land.
We need a transfer station to be able to provide the best possible service, most efficient service that we can in metropolitan St. Louis.
Okay. You also told Channel 5 that where the smoldering fire is right now is far away from the nuclear waste. And you put that number at 2,500 feet.
That's correct.
I've seen maps where the entire landfill isn't 2,500 feet wide. So how is that possible?
I'd love to take a look at that map. The entire footprint of the site is about 200 acres. Bridgeton Landfill itself is about 52 acres. You heard some people earlier in the fall talking about, these were activists and some other folks who were involved, talking about a distance of 1,000 feet or 1,200 feet from the location of the reaction to the known radiologically impacted material in West Lake Landfill. That was true back in 2013, say June of 2013. It's not true today. What the reaction has done has continued to migrate, if you will, in a counterclockwise direction to the southernmost portion of the South Quarry. Love to have you out one day. You could stand right on top of it and I'll show you. But it's today, as we speak, at a depth of between 60 to 150 feet below the surface level in the South Quarry, and distance-wise 2,500 feet south of the known areas of rim.
So the people who are saying that the surface area is less than not 2,500 feet wide are wrong. They're just factually incorrect on that.
I'd love to have you come out, bring a tape measure. We'll take a look. It's 2,500 feet.
Okay. Well, there's a lot of people on social media, and as you can imagine, a lot of people are listening to every word you say. I want it on the record because they're telling me one thing. I want to hear it from you.
Sure, absolutely. And here's the difference. I got to be accountable. We have regulators. We have customers. We have ongoing litigation. We obviously have shareholders as well. Everything that I say has to be accurate. I've got to be accountable to truth. There are other people that don't have that same burden of accountability, and they can say what they choose.
Right. Okay. So what's going to happen to the Bridgeton landfill? What does Republic Services, what do you want to do with this thing?
Well, so what we want to do with Bridgeton is exactly what we are doing, which is maintaining the site in a managed state and keeping it safe. We've got the reaction isolated to the south portion of the South Quarry. That's where we want it to be. Now, the reaction is going to take a few more years before it self-extinguishes.
Reaction, you mean the
subsurface chemical reaction. Its technical name is exothermic chemical reaction, but it's a heat-producing reaction. One way to think of it is sort of like a compost. But it's occurring southern portion, South Quarry. We've invested more than $150 million in a lot of different infrastructure to do two things: manage the reaction and control odor. So what we want at Bridgeton Landfill is to continue to keep the reaction in the South Quarry, and over time that reaction will self-extinguish.
Okay. There have been people who've come on the show who have said that the nuclear waste you say is in one part, the trash is in another. There are people who have come on the show and said that we don't know exactly where the nuclear waste is.
So what they're talking about is if you were to come out to the site, you'd see at West Lake Landfill, there's a fence line that the EPA has installed. They did that because that's where they knew at the time radiologically impacted material to be located. They have done additional investigation, as they rightly should. They've been doing a lot of different tests and analysis of a host of different things. Part of that additional investigation did lead to some locations where there is radiologically impacted material outside of the fence line. They're doing more investigation as we speak to determine where those locations might be. But the reality is it's all in that same vicinity of where we know it to be today.
They said they were trying to dig a trench between the fire and the nuclear waste.
Yeah,
and they stopped because they found nuclear waste in that trench.
Great point. You're talking about the isolation barrier, and the EPA has said that by the end of this calendar year, they will make a decision on if there should be a barrier, what type of barrier, and where that barrier location would go. For our part, the EPA asked us for technical input on barrier options. We provided that. Now the Army Corps of Engineers is involved. They're taking a look at what we provided to the EPA. They're putting their own prints on it and saying, we like this, or maybe we tweak this. But by the end of this calendar year, the EPA will make a decision about if there should be a barrier and where that barrier should go.
Russ Nocky, our guest. He is Vice President of Communications for Republic Services. The Weldon Springs encapsulation, they say, is the same material as the nuclear waste in the West Lake Landfill. Is that true?
I'm not an expert on Weldon Springs. We do know some of the people that did some of the work as part of the remedy at Weldon Springs,
right.
And those folks we already have an agreement with to come and do the work. If the EPA in the end of 2016 comes back and says, we want to put a cap on it like we were talking about in 2008,
right.
Same people that did the work, the remedial work at Weldon Springs,
right.
are ready to go. We'll put them to work for 3 to 4 years to do the work at Westlake.
What I understand is that Weldon Springs is not a cap, it's an encapsulation, and that's very different. And so are you willing to encapsulate the Bridgeton landfill if the EPA comes out and says that's what it needs?
So the EPA is going to make the decision on what should happen at Westlake. In 2008, they had proposed a cap of
right.
about 5 feet of crushed rock and clay and soil. And really the purpose for that cap is to forever encase the radiologically impacted material that's buried in Westlake landfill. Think about it as, rainwater would run off rather than migrating down and coming into contact with the rim at 12 to 25 feet below. With the cap, it'd be 17 to 30 feet below. It would also help to prevent any potential release of radon because radon dissipates naturally over 3 days, so that isotope would decay as it's moving up.
But Weldon Springs, they didn't cap it, from what I understand. They encapsulated it, which is different.
Again, I'm not going to pretend to be an authority on Weldon Springs and what happened there. I will
right.
tell you the same people that did the work there
right.
are ready to go to do the work at Westlake.
But they're saying, though, the cap is fine in that instance, but it doesn't necessarily encapsulate it, which means it can get into the groundwater. It's not safe if there's a earthquake or a tornado comes by or any other things. If it's good for Weldon Springs, why shouldn't that same stuff be done to Bridgeton?
I think what you're really getting at is the notion of science and data and decades of science and data that exists from the EPA, independent experts, talking about what's at Westlake and what the solution ultimately should be for Westlake. There are some, Maryland Heights activists who do not like those data points because they don't fit the narrative that they have. And this holds true for the Missouri Coalition for the Environment as well. Their narrative is a different outcome at Westlake. It generally involves full excavation of the site, and there are a host of reasons why that's just not feasible.
Why not?
Well, for starters, when I have you out there, you're going to see you're at the base of Lambert Airport. Bridgeton Landfill actually has a covenant with the airport. In 2004, it closed down early because Lambert was extending that long runway. You've got commercial air traffic that, is a mile as the crow flies, passing over the site all of the time. Anytime you start digging into waste, the reality is you invite critters. Critters means birds. Birds in that proximity to commercial air traffic is just risky.
I am holding in my hands EPA memo, I guess, from March of 2014. It says things like short-term effects of the subsurface fire generate great amount of leaching, which have been observed at the Bridgeton Landfill. The subsurface fire may result in increased emissions of radon and other contaminants in the air and groundwater, even with annual inspections and proper maintenance of the designs discussed in the 2008 memo. You read this, and it sounds like that this is a really bad deal, and that it's not going to get any better.
Well, so these are scientists writing technical documents for technical purposes, and sometimes technical English doesn't translate into common sense everyday English. And so sometimes when you hear certain things like, a reaction or radiologically impacted material, whatever level that is at Westlake, it's low level, it's been leached twice, these kinds of scientific terms can alarm people. And I'm not going to point fingers at the EPA and say that their writing is part of the hysteria. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying that this is complex. There is a lot of science. There's a lot of data. It's easy for those who want to cherry pick data to fit a narrative that serves their purpose. The last thing I'll say, though, is just a couple weeks ago, you may be aware that a component of the CDC put out a report, and the EPA was talking about it, and that report said to this day, and we're still without a cap, mind you, still without a remedy at West Lake Landfill, there's no public health or safety risks as it relates to the air, the water, or the soil at or in the vicinity of West Lake Landfill.
Yes, I guess they say that. Attorney General Koster is suing.
Correct.
He says something very different, or his lawsuit says something very different.
His state experts back in September, when they put forward their expert reports, made some claims. Some of those claims inferred things like in 3 to 6 months, there could be a boom. Obviously, as you point out, the Attorney General is suing Bridgeton Landfill. We have, in turn, issued our state expert reports. But as part of the whole state expert report process, there's depositions. So when it was our turn to depose the state experts that were talking about some of these things, radiologically contaminated trees off-site, that somehow, St. Louis could go boom in 3 to 6 months. The reaction was migrating from the South Quarry, rapidly towards the North Quarry. Under deposition, the state's experts reversed their position. And they just said, you know what? That's simply not true. The reaction is isolated to the South Quarry. It is in a managed state. We're just putting out something today that talks about the radiologically impacted trees off-site. There's a host of scientific flaws that are involved there. But if you look at the radionuclides, what they found off-site is a completely different isotope than what's actually at West Lake Landfill.
Russ Nocky, our guest. Can you stick around for another segment?
I'd love to.
He's Vice President of Communications for Republic Services. It's 9:30 here, Big 550.